They say that life is hard, that there's not enough to go around, and that it's not spiritual to want money. And repeatedly, they say to themselves, I'm not good enough. I say that life is filled with possibilities. Abundance is literally all around us. And you being here is more than enough. My name is Arabelle, and my assignment in this life is to question the belief systems, to learn the secrets that are hidden out in the open, and to show others what's possible. Each episode, I bring you a guest or a message that will make you question your choices, challenge your views, dig deep into your beliefs, and wake you up to your truth. Join us as we walk through this thing called life. You ready? Let's do this. Hey, Niamh. Welcome to the Awaken Leaders podcast interview series. We have been trying to schedule this interview for some time now, and I know that this is like the perfect timing for us to talk about whatever it is that we're going to be talking about. So first of all, welcome and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Arabelle, and it's always an honor and a pleasure to be part of anything that you are creating, because I know everything that you put out into the world, you do so with so much grace and integrity. And so, yeah, I'm excited for us to drop in, and I believe that, you know, it's all in divine timing, and it's probably perfect that we're meeting today to share what is on our hearts today.
Absolutely. And, you know, like we discussed just earlier, we actually don't know what we're going to be talking about today, but let's see what comes up. But what we do know is, because we've been talking to each other time to time over the last few months, specifically over the last few weeks, the things that we've been moving through, the things that we've been experiencing and have experienced, and the lessons that come out of it, I think that's like something that's really in our heart. And I believe that whoever is listening to this interview today is probably not far away from that as well. So let's dive in and let's talk about like what are the things that you've been experiencing over the last, let's just say from the January of 2019 and today so far.
Yeah, this year has definitely been a surprise for many, including myself. And I think, you know, I opened this year, 2019, with the intention that I was calling in greater resources and also calling in greater support to allow me to step into my work and my service at a bigger level. And, you know, I set the intention in January of creating a blank canvas. And that process, you know, really meant facing some of the things that I still had attachments to. And when you, I guess, have these big intentions to serve at a greater level or to step into your truth at a bigger level, things that are in the way or things that are holding you back are going to come to the surface. And I guess I've seen this in my own life. I've also seen that in some of the people I'm working with and colleagues and friends, that there has been some big themes emerge even in the first 6 months of this year. And these themes have really been of surrender, of deeper trust within yourself. And I think as you were speaking there, Arabelle, you know, the words came through: trust your path inherently, like trust yourself inherently. We're definitely at a point, I feel, right now where people are being called to trust that inner voice. And even if it doesn't make sense to our family or friends or to the people we serve, and we're being called to really step outside what I, you know, call the conditional matrices, and to really listen to where we're being called. And that path is a courageous one. That is one where we have to really trust our path. And I guess for me, you know, really stepping into that intention, I forgot about the depth of what I would have to face in order for that to be made manifest. And so what I'm dropping into here is there is a process in which we move through every time we set an intention. And for me, it's understanding and remembering even the nature of how everything in this world is created. And so that for everything to be born, there is also simultaneously a death process. And so the process of death and creation is actually simultaneous. And we forget about that. So in order to create anew, we must be willing to let go. And we must be willing to transition from one energy into another. And so that can become chaotic when we cling on to that which is now old, to that, when we cling on to what has become our identity. And I guess identity coherence is something that we as human beings is one of the most important things that we hold so dear. And that process of creation now is calling for us, if we want to live in harmony with our truth and where we're being called into, there will be this death process that we must graciously enter into, surrender into, so that we can allow for the creation of what we're calling in to be made manifest. In some ways, up until recently, and I'm just going to speak from my own experience, we have in some ways been able to sugarcoat the death process because it hasn't been as evident. But right now, as we're creating with more intention, with more purity in our hearts, we're calling for greater change in the work that we're doing, the people that we're working with, and on the planet. Because of the purity of that intention, we must, and we are being forced to let go of the attachments that are keeping us from playing out old limited cycles of experiences. And these are, the experiences of lack, the experiences of guilt, of shame, of suppression. We cannot no longer live in a reality trying to create more peace and more love when we still have attachments to these lower planes of existence. And it's not to say that they are not of value, because they are, but they have served us to this point. And in order for us to allow for more heightened intuition, creativity, inspiration, and for us to live from our heart more, there is a process. And a death, in some ways, we've been programmed to believe that it is getting rid of or falling away of something. But my experience over, even this past 18 months, a death process is really an alchemical one. And rather than seeing it as something being lost, it's almost the process of allowing for the alchemical burning away of the residues that no longer serve, and the integration of the wisdom that those experiences, those teachings, those lessons have given us, and integrating that into our wholeness so that we can create from a new place, bringing with us the purity or the extraction of the lesson that those things actually were to bring us in our life. And so I guess that reframe for me was actually quite a big one. Particularly, I think, many people are experiencing, challenges in their lives, and that could be in relationships, in their personal life, in their jobs, or even in their businesses. And those challenges are an invitation for us to now look at what are the things that are limiting our choices, limiting our expression, and what are our attachments, and what are the healthy and unhealthy ones. And I'm just going to say, for me, I was holding on for so long. I was holding on to what I felt was my dream life, living in Byron Bay in a beautiful house by the ocean. I had the perfect car, the perfect partner. I was leading, events and coaching and mentoring people. And in some ways, I thought I'd reached the pinnacle of what I wanted to see for myself and my life. And yet there was so much more to go. And in some ways, I'd created what I thought and what society has perpetuated, throughout stories and TV and on our movie screens. what is the ideal lifestyle. And yet I was still creating within the conditional matrix. So I was creating through condition on every level and in every aspect of my life. What happened is my intention is always to expand and to grow and to evolve. And that intention is our guiding force. And so I popped out of that bubble and realized that I had reached a level of success in a conditional world, yet my true nature is unconditional, right? Love is unconditional, nature is unconditional. And so then I began this journey of, in some ways, letting go of everything that had created my identity, everything that I was holding on to. And that meant, letting go of my long-term relationship, my home, letting go of abundance in the way in which I was creating, letting go of even how my business was operating and the types of events and retreats. And I went through this alchemical process, I guess you could even say an experience of trial by fire. And that is really surrendering and letting go to the things that defined me. And that's when this journey began, this journey, which, I feel like many are afraid of, and we all are, is having the courage to walk the path of the unknown and to shed the skins of society and to really challenge and to question. So over, the next couple of months, I really found myself in the unknown and beginning to, in one way, feeling lost and disconnected, having let go of so much, but in another way, feeling really curious about who I was becoming. And there's always both, but I think we sometimes forget that because when we're in the destructive process. And I love this quote. It's by Cynthia Orchelli, and she says, "For a seed to grow into its truest expression, its shell must crack and its insides must come out. And to anyone who does not understand transformation, it looks like complete destruction." And I think that's the key. It is destructive because we must break down the barriers that limit and control us. And we must, in some ways, it's the process of tenderizing the soul. It's really that embracing the purification. And in that, it's not to forget that we are also becoming, we are also re-emerging as someone who is more whole. When we go to the gym, when we work out, well, maybe not me, but some of you guys might go to the gym. When we lift weights, it breaks down the fibers of the muscle so that the fibers can strengthen and grow back even stronger. And so in some ways, this is the process the soul must go through. And many of us are being tested right now at a level that is really asking us to trust.
And when you said the word destruction, I totally relate to that because, as you know, we've been talking to each other, I'm going through my own process of dying and rebirthing. And that phase of going through that chaos and destruction can be very challenging. And in those moments, it's really easy for us to forget why we are in that process, because our ultimate desire or basic instinct of human beings is to move away from pain and to move towards pleasure. And destruction definitely feels painful. And so in those moments, even myself, who like to claim myself as somebody who is quite aware of a lot of things that's going on in my own world. And I'm the same as you, where my intention in life is to grow and to expand. And therefore, I go through these destruction cycles again and again to be reborn, to become who I want to become more and more. But in that process, what has been highlighted to me quite a lot in this process, which is something that you mentioned, which you hit the nail on its head, was the attachment. When it comes to attachment, I have practiced letting go of attachment a lot. But then what I've come to realize is there are so many levels of attachment. The first level of the biggest letting go process that I have done was 4 or 5 years ago when I had a house. I sold a house, I sold everything, I gave away furniture, I gave away a lot of those things. A lot of people would say I was having a quarter life crisis. Maybe that's what it was, but it doesn't matter. I let go of a lot of things, and I had 2 suitcases, a car, and a dog, and I lived a digital nomad life, which was freeing and liberating, simply because I allowed myself to let go of the material things that I was attached to. So that was like my first level of practicing letting go of the attachments. But I have come to understand over these years that there are many levels of attachments. Another one being like beliefs, the beliefs about ourselves where I am good or I'm not good enough, or I can do this or I can't do this, as simple as that. And holding on to those beliefs can hold us back or catapult us onto, to the next level. And then there are other attachments that I think, again, it could be a story, but for me, it's true where I am right now. I think it's quite impossible for us to let go of all the attachments, because my child being one is the biggest attachment, I don't think I'll ever be able to let go of that. Or maybe I will be when he turns 18 or 20 or something. Another attachment being my dog. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, as you know, I'm at the crossroads once again. And this crossroads mean, do I live here or do I move to another country? And that also means that if I move to another country, that means that I may have to temporarily let go of my dog, but leave her with somebody that I trust. But to me, like, I'm at the predicament, although I'm talking about my dog, whoever's listening to this can relate it back to whatever attachments that they're attached to. And I'm at that point where I'm questioning, when I rescued my dog, she's a rescue dog, I promised her that I would never, ever, 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 ever leave her behind for whatever reason. And now I'm in this space where I may require to move because of my own personal reasons. And that means that I'm going to have to part ways with her for a while. It could be 6 months, it could be a year, or it could be just 3 months. I don't know. And I'm at that point where I'm thinking, am I not honoring my promise to her? Is it okay to change my mind? Or is it okay because moving means it will be easier for my own emotional well-being and consequently on my son? Or am I just making excuses? So I'm going through all these questions in my head, and that's just one of the things that I'm going through right now. And I'm sure that people who are listening to this are going through their similar version of questioning and sitting through those things and haven't really come to that point in their decision-making process. So my question to you is, number one, how do we let go of those attachments? And two, how do we know if we're making the right decision? Or is there even such a thing, the right decision?
For me, it's really about observing what are the things in my life that are limiting my choices, and my freedom. And some things we have attachments to that are healthy, and in ways that they don't come between us and living our truth. And in some ways, some of those attachments actually support us in living our truth. So that could be a dog, it could be a relationship, it could be an environment, like potentially a city or a town or your home that you're living in. It's a beneficial agreement or contract that supports you living your truth. And then there are other things in our lives that, if we are really honest, and I mean like courageously honest, by putting the mirror up and we really ask, is this relationship truly honoring or serving me? Is this allowing me to live in liberation? And does it allow me more choice in my life? Does it serve my freedom of choice? Is this environment nurturing me? Is this business relationship, this contract? And in some ways, is the way in which I am making money, is that relationship a healthy relationship right now? For me, it's like everything in this world is we are in co-creation with, we're in a relationship with. So even money, time, even the non-physical things, once I started seeing everything as energy and as an energy exchange or as a relationship, I began to question, okay, if this was my best friend, is this exchange serving me? Is it honoring me or is it dishonoring me? And I'm looking at, like, for example, with how I was creating in my business and my attachment to how I was selling my programs and how I was making money and why I wanted to make money and those kind of things, I started to look at whether that relationship was in its highest, whether it was serving what I was wanting to step into or not, and whether my home, my environment was, whether my relationships were. And so in some ways, there is no particular process. It's really an internal inquiry. I guess this is just the journey inward and beginning to really look at, like, everything that is manifested in our life, every experience, everything we're moving through at a deeper level. Our soul has almost agreed to play out that experience. When it comes to a moment in time where we begin to stop and pause and question those agreements, we get to choose what we wish to bring with us and what we wish to, in some ways, release. But in the releasing, we honor the reason that experience has been there in the first place. What we're being called into is a deeper level of self-inquiry. There is no textbook. There is no 5-step process. I found in my own journey, the most powerful realizations are the ones that we have when we begin to create a more intimate connection with life, with nature, and see everything as a living and breathing organism, even our relationships. There's the process, there is the death and the rebirth. So the death being the transmutation of what no longer serves. But even within a friendship or a relationship, that death doesn't necessarily mean that that person disappears or that relationship ends. It's remembering that, honoring the process, like the agreement, that death could look like, the relationship going through a process where all the patterns, the behaviors, the tendencies to overexert or lean on each other in ways that are not serving go through this transmutation. So it's like that energy gets to be released, and then that's the breakdown. And then you get to recreate something new. So you go through that process, that alchemical process of creating new ways to relate to each other. And I think that, it's quite often misunderstood too, that to surrender and to let go means that things actually disappear, things actually go, and that's not the truth. But sometimes we have to be willing to reach the point of letting go, because that's the ultimate liberation, is when you can be in a place where you know that I am safe. I like saying to yourself, I am safe, I am whole, I am complete, and that I am okay. Even if all of this is stripped away, knowing, I think it's like a deeper conviction in yourself. And that's the moment that you reach that, it's like something clicks. And the very thing that we fear of losing may actually never be lost at all, because it was the fear of losing that thing or that person was actually the limitation. So it wasn't necessarily the thing, but it was the fear of losing it that actually limits us and controls us.
That is so true, because I have personally seen in myself that I know that from my gut, from the deep knowing that, let's just say, right is where I'm supposed to go. But I keep going left because of the resistance or the attachment, and I don't listen. And then at one point I realized that, hang on, I'm supposed to go right. And okay, despite all the attachments, despite all the fears, despite all the doubts, despite all the resistance, despite all of that, I now choose to go right. And then that decision alone, I have realized, actually, I have experienced so many times that suddenly there's a middle path that just opened up, like a door popped out of nowhere. And then I didn't even have to go right. And it's just like this secret code to this magic portal that just is even better. And I think that acceptance, and the word that came up in my head was courage. And having that courage, having that trust, and having that full acceptance, I think it diffuses all that negative ties or negative energy that ties to whatever it is that's keeping us stuck. And that opens up a new door. I don't know if that's making sense for the people who are watching or listening, but my takeaway personally from this piece of conversation is, if you're at the crossroads, if you're thinking where to go, whether to go right or left, this is what I'm personally going to do. I'm going to first sit through this and really accept and have that courage and willingness to say, yes, I'm listening, and what I'm hearing is to go right, and therefore I'm going to do that, and I'm going to wait and see what unfolds from here. And from my past experience of 35 years of experience, I know that a miracle always happens. And thanks, Niamh. Like what you just gave me was just this. Yeah, it's just phenomenal. It's amazing. As we're talking, there's one thing that pops up in my head, a question that might trigger a few people, but I have been pondering on that question for quite a while. And this is slightly separate from our previous conversation. Especially in our personal development or the spiritual development world, we say this a lot. Is this serving you? If it's not serving you, move away from that, drop that, and then move towards what's going to serve you. And while I can see the benefits in that, why it's so important for us to move away from something that's not healthy for us, do you think that kind of questioning has allowed or given people an opportunity to be selfish? Because I have started to see many asking that question, is this serving me? Nope, it's not. But, so I'm not going to do it. But then, is life always about that? Is life not reciprocal? Whereas, sometimes we have to do the things that are not currently serving us, but it's serving somebody that we love. What do you think?
This is a really, really big question, and it's one that has often left me pondering too, because when I ask this question, again, it's where are you asking the question from? Are you asking, is this serving me and my conditional wants and desires? Or is this serving the highest good of my true self, my soul, and the highest good of the people that we live with, co-create with, and also the earth? And I think when you ask the question from there, quite often the answer can be quite different. And I think the personal development industry and this space, in some ways, it can become a trap. And if we're not careful, we can easily bypass where the real work is, because it's very easy to say, like, for example, I've just spent the last 12 months living back in Ireland, in my home country, something that I resisted for 8 years. And I told myself I would never go back because I had this story. If I went back to Ireland, I would be a failure. I told myself that I had this story, that I would do whatever I took to not go back because it didn't serve me, right? The environment wouldn't nurture me. And so I lived most of the last few years doing what I could to avoid the necessary medicine and to avoid the necessary truth of actually going home and realizing that the real work was actually being in the environment that I resisted the most. So there's definitely, when you're asking that question, where are you asking that question from? Because if I was asking that question from, I guess, my ego, not that the ego isn't bad, but the part of me that is like, okay, this is my life, these are my desires, these are my wants, these are the things that I want to see in my life. Yet my soul, when asking the question, was like, you need to go home. You need to go home and face all the parts of you that you've been suppressing, the parts of you that are still affecting your choices in relationships, in work. They're still affecting how you show up in the world because you haven't dealt with them yet. And so going home was a really courageous act. And even for the first few months, I kept trying my best. I kept trying to, okay, I'm just going to move to Europe, or I'm just going to travel. I'm going to be a digital nomad. I did everything that I could to try and avoid just being in Ireland and to being there, until one day I just asked myself the question, like, what am I running away from? What am I hiding from? The moment I embraced it, that's when the journey really began. And that's when this trial by fire, or whatever you want to call it, began, because it felt like challenge after challenge after challenge started to manifest. And then I started to realize that, these challenges weren't a bad thing. They were really just an opportunity for me to start to see where my limiting behaviors were, where my limiting beliefs were. It almost became like a microcosm of the macrocosm of how my life was. And I began to see how these deeply ingrained patterns and behaviors really get ingrained at such a young age. And, moving back with my family, you kind of re-enter that ecosystem and you get triggered and your emotions bubble to the surface, and you actually start living out and operating from those places and from the root upon which these patterns emerged. And it really became an opportunity where I really, for the first time, I could fully say that I embraced it. And I had people in my life who are coaches. I had friends in my life. I had people who I hold in such high esteem that, told me to get out of there. They told me that it would ruin me. I think, Arabelle, you were one of the few friends that I had that, we were in contact this whole time. And we were, I was just sharing the journey with you, and you were really holding that space for me, which was so great. I'm so grateful. But very few. And I realized that I started to wonder, was I on the wrong path? Because this is where the doubt creeps in, right? Because you embrace it, you're in it. And this is the test, because then you're seeing other people in some ways still living in the conditional realm, still creating in the conditional realm. And yet you're, like, for me, I was in this unraveling process. So I was unwinding myself from it. I wondered why people couldn't see or couldn't acknowledge or even support the journey I was in. And I realized it's because in some ways they had not been through that. And in some ways I'm just bringing this up because that period of darkness, that period of feeling alone, is actually quite the necessary component when you're going through the unraveling, because it's only you can do that. It's only you can be in that place.
So what was the biggest learning that you have learned, or the medicine that you received by going back to your roots, where everything started, where Niamh was created per se? What were you able to shift and transform there?
What I'm about to share will probably seem quite simple and very basic, yet when embraced and followed through, it's quite a powerful process. And that is, I simply embraced the pain. I just said that I was willing to see this through no matter how long it would take. And I committed to the journey. So in that moment, decided I wasn't going to give any more energy to try and escape or to leave or to find another way out of what I was wanting to face. And when I embraced the journey, that's when things started to shift. I started to not see emotion, whether it was sadness, guilt, shame, fear. I just saw emotion as a necessary component and gave equal value to joy, to love, that I did fear, sadness, and grief. And I simply just embraced those emotions as they came to the surface and asked, what is the lesson here? And it's funny because it might sound strange to some, but I actually befriended pain. And I realized that pain had been ruling my life, and that in some ways I had this deeply embedded program that I needed to suffer in order to receive. So this deeply suffering program, I had to go into the suffering, and I had to get to the root of the suffering and the root of the triggers and be with it. And then what I found is actually, even just by being with it, it wasn't suffering. Pain when suppressed is suffering. But pain when embraced is liberating. And I just got like full body goosebumps when I just said that. That is the truth.
I heard a quote the other day that says, pain is unavoidable, but suffering is optional. I've been sitting with that as well because I think it's not just you and not just me. I think a lot of people, whether knowingly or unknowingly, have this program where, because it is also very widely advocated and widely accepted, which is no pain, no gain. Breakdown before the breakthrough. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. These are the things that have been wired into our head for so long. And deep down, I think we all believe, or at least most of us believe to a certain level, that we have to experience that in order to be worthy of that, worthy of something, or in order to be rewarded something in life. However, at the same time, I know that we need to go through pain because I have seen quite a few people who, agree to disagree, but I don't agree, which is, they prescribe only one side of life, which is you don't need to focus on the pain. You don't need to focus on the challenges. You just focus on the good stuff and the good stuff will come. To me, it is quite dangerous because if pain or challenges or whatever it is that we deem negative, if they are not necessary, they wouldn't exist. That's a law of nature, right? If it's not necessarily, it will go extinct, just like the animals, just like trees, just like certain type of plants. As long as it is there, that means it is necessary. And that means that we still need to embrace it, which is exactly what you did, but not attach stories to it or become aware of these deeply ingrained beliefs that we didn't even have a chance to choose. I'm not playing victim here, but it is the truth, So now, as adults, we can escape or we can let go of those childhood programming or conditioning. We can choose to install new belief programs into our lives so that we start to live our life in the way that's more authentic to us. And from what you're saying, I don't think it sounds simple at all. Embracing pain is not simple. It is a big process and I'm still working through that and I'm still learning to embrace it even more and more and more. But that process, again, that's how we opened up this podcast, is it feels like destruction. And only when we choose to sit through that destruction and learn to embrace the pain, which is what I'm telling myself in my head right now, then we first, I think, in my opinion, diffuses all those emotional charges and then automatically allow ourselves and free ourselves up so that we can then choose different choices in our lives. Talking about that, I want to shift gear a little bit, but it's still connected to that topic. I know you do this process that's very powerful because we've ran trainings together before. Your work of Attune Me and, doing a lot of attunements and stuff like that. So I know I have seen you done that on people. I have heard about that from you and I have learned bits and pieces. But I am very interested in that work. And I know that work is very powerful. So could you talk a little bit about what that process is? And maybe if you can give like a tiny example of something that somebody's going through and how you would help them move through that so that they have more, they have a better idea of how that process works.
It really is, I suppose, me over the last few years integrating my own understanding of this process of growth and evolution that we go through as human beings. Everything that I share is really to empower others to be able to navigate their journey with more truth, with more autonomy, and to really step into their self-sovereignty. So it's moving away from, I guess, the limiting structures of teachings and moving into a space of accessing a deeper awareness in the body, learning how to embrace our emotional intelligence, and really about accessing our primordial knowing that awakens in our body at a cellular level when we begin to release and integrate our traumas and start to embrace the array of emotional intelligence that we have access to when we start to shift shift our human perception. So how we perceive our emotions, how we perceive our behaviors right now can be limiting our expression of life. So this process of attunement is not a one path fits all, or, however you would put it. This is really the process of an individual embarking on a journey of awakening their true cellular awareness. And to do that, it's about, first and foremost, this unraveling process. The process first of attunement. So attunement is really to come into harmony with. Harmony, Richard Rudd has an amazing quote, and he says that harmony cannot be created or destroyed. It's actually a state upon which we all exist in, and it can only be entered into. That presupposes that there's a part of us that is in harmony. And in some ways, as a human collective, we've become lost, or in a way distorted, or have been living a life or seeing life through a particular lens for some time. And this work, in its truest essence, is to restore the remembrance of our original genetic blueprint. And that is that we've come here to have an emotional experience. We've come here to feel a vast array of emotion, and yet our societal stories have only served to suppress them. And so there's the unraveling of our own conditional matrices, and then there's the unraveling of our societal programs, stories, and matrices. And that is the journey into the wild unknown. And I believe that every specific person has a specific, and I'm not going to use the word coding, because in some ways that feels very mechanical, but they have an organic alchemical process upon which they will awaken this awareness, in which they will begin to access their emotional intelligence. And their emotional intelligence, it's not just energetic. It's actually as well very much a part of the alchemical process connected to our endocrine system and to our organs, to our tissues. And as we begin to do that, and as we begin to access a field of awareness and realize that our body is probably one of the most highly sophisticated organic technologies that is available to us on the planet, that has, an intricate, sophisticated way of connecting with every living thing. We begin to trace how we store trauma and memory in our cells, and we recognize that in some ways, as we tread our feet on the earth, that we in some ways sink, just like our feet being like a fingerprint on the earth. We begin to recognize that there is a very beautiful yet complex intelligence that's running through all of us. And so the process first becomes with syncing with nature, harmonizing with nature, because the natural realms on this planet, there are realms that are uncorrupted. There are realms that are pristine and that are in harmony and that are still in their pure state. And as we do that, then we begin to harmonize with each other until ultimately we need to face off with ourselves. And that's why I call it attune me, because when we get to that place, we begin to recognize that we are ultimately a mirror of everything that exists, and that we really are on this journey to restore our remembrance of the truth of our true human blueprint, and that we have come here to realize that in the body. And this work is about transcending many of even the teachings, spiritual teachings, and even some of the things that have been passed down for thousands of years. And as we move through that process and discern where we're holding those programs, those perceptions in our body, passed down through our ancestral DNA, passed down from generation to generation, everything is memory. And our body stores everything that has happened throughout our human history is stored in this body. And this is the most incredible library that we can access to. And this is not about tapping into Akashic records. It's not about ascending to these higher dimensions. In fact, this journey is the integration into the body, and it's actually the process of grounding and allowing for a new expression and realization of who we are to come through this vessel, this body. This work is wanting to come through in very different ways. And it's not your typical 5-week course or, 12-month training or however you want to look at it. Every person is wholly unique, and every person is at a different place in their journey. And every soul has come here with a specific sequence in how their awareness will awaken. And it's not for me or anyone else to dictate how that happens or to even control that. And so that's why I work very much with the body's wisdom and empower people to be able to tune into muscle testing and to be able to tune into the awareness within their body so that they can be aware of what they're feeling, what is arising, and the process they're moving through. I also feel like it's very much akin to an alchemical process. And when we understand that and begin to embrace the process of alchemy, we will begin to attune to, okay, what stage in this process am I in? And that is the process of surrender, and know that we are always in this death and rebirth cycle in everything that we do. And so much of what I help to empower people is to acknowledge the part of the natural cycle they're in, both in their grander awakening, but also in the micro moment, in what is arising right now, and how that connects to this grander journey of integrating awareness through the body. There's also, this is very much work that it transcends the intellect. So much of what I do is experiential, and that means creating experiences where people can seek a direct awareness within themselves, and creating workshops and even retreats now where they can really allow themselves to dive deeper into an awareness in their body, and to allow them to walk away from those experiences with the tools that are attuned to both the place that they're in, but also that will support them to continue their journey, so that it's not really created for people to keep coming back. The idea is for people to step into their own personal empowerment and to be able to navigate this journey, because it's been quite a long time on this planet that we've had more and more people desiring to live in true sovereignty. And that is from the place when we begin to reclaim our body, when we begin to reconcile our trauma, both personally and transpersonally, when we begin to awaken our emotional intelligence, and we begin to live free from the conditional programs and the conditional matrices. That's when we actually liberate ourselves, and that happens individually. I think there is a lot of want and desire for us to create these beautiful communities and tribes and to live in a loving way, and yet that will happen. But what must first happen is this process of attunement.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And especially when you said that, it's a process where, especially your retreats and stuff like that, that's what's going to teach and give people all the tools to walk away with. And what came into my head is, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail to you, or when you have more than a hammer in your toolbox, then you start to have the option to choose which tool works for whatever challenges that you're going through. And another thing that I want to say, I keep smiling while you're talking, because the moment you started talking about attunement, the sunlight from that window behind you is shining so bright. You look like, like in the movies where this angel suddenly starts appearing in the bright light, and you're still like that from the video. So those who believe in signs and those who are listening to this, definitely go experience attunement. To me, you just look like this angel explaining about some cosmic tool that you're going to help people with. But it sounds really amazing. And I have seen firsthand you do this work. And for me personally, the reason why I like this, whether you call it technology, whether you call it method, tool, it doesn't really matter. To me, why I really like it is because I'm a big believer in grounding ourselves. Because while I respect the other modalities that helps people to reach out to something that's out there, I feel personally that's not sustainable because we can't always be out there. Otherwise, we won't have a body. We have a body on this earth because we need to be here on this earth in this physical body. And that's the whole reason why we're here. And therefore, we need to know exactly how to work with this body because, like you said, this body is what holds the memories, what holds the organs, everything that keeps us alive. And this body is also what creates magic in life. So, when we know how to work with this body and when we understand the power of this body more and more, then we'll be able to master life. And to me, that's part of life mastery. And it's not just about intellect or like we can do all the spiritual things, but if we're not grounded, then to me, it's like, what's the point, right? So it's amazing that you're sharing that and then you're doing that with so many people. What I'll also do is I know the website, so I'm going to put the link to your website in this blog post, the interview post as well. As we're coming towards the end of the interview, I just want to ask a couple of things that will really help those who are listening. So my question is, especially for this particular episode, where both yourself and myself at the start of this year, we actually sort of did it together, that, you know, what 2019 is going to be like. And then we wrote it down, we showed it to each other, and we were very clear, but at the same time, we didn't really know what's going to show up in our field. And of course, together with the big and powerful and very potent intention that we set at the start of the year, what's been unfolding in our lives has been very interesting and challenging as well, and exciting also. So I know that people who are listening right now to this interview, they also had a similar intention at the beginning of this year, whether they said it knowingly or unknowingly in their subconscious mind, but they have done it. And now they're seeing a lot of things happening, shifting, like playing the chess of life. And they're a little bit confused. They're a little bit doubting their choices and decisions. Some of them are even feeling like if they can do it, if they are made for this. So for those who are going through that, what advice would you give to them so that they start to see something by 31st of December 2019?
One is to just acknowledge that you've chosen this. So even if it doesn't make sense, whatever's showing up right now, it's a necessary component that's shown up in your life for you to embrace so that you can achieve the desired outcome that you've actually asked for. And so we can quite often find ourselves in a challenge or in a mess or whatever we describe it as, and forget that we have actually chosen to commit to a higher outcome. And this is the necessary path or hurdle that we must integrate and not necessarily overcome, because you're integrating this challenge, you're integrating this wisdom. And in some ways, for us to receive the desired outcome, the thing that we're looking for, there's the process of becoming. We're becoming the person who can actually hold that, the energy. So if you're calling in serving more clients, if you're calling in to be a vessel of greater abundance, and you're not energetically matched to that now, then we must go through this process of unraveling and becoming the person who can actually be able to receive that and live that. That would be the first thing, is when you're in the darkness, when you're in the struggle, remember what you've committed to. I'm just thinking in terms of other advice, I really just feel that there is nothing else that I would add, because sometimes we can, in ways, try to attach stories or try to make something of what we're going through. And it's almost like adding an unnecessary component to the process. And so if we can embrace where we're at, remember what we've committed to, and not to attach meaning or to perceive our reactions to that situation as a bad thing, even if you get angry, even if you get triggered, whatever that is, simply allow it and embrace it. and keep moving forward, because it's when we get stagnant, when we get stuck, and when we try to control the process, that's when we end up being in it actually a lot longer than we need to. And I think that's what I realized, when I embraced the pain, that's when I liberated myself, and that's when the lessons came, and that's when I moved through.
I know that everyone who's watching and listening this interview right now, they are, if they don't know you yet, they are falling in love with you already for being who you are, first and foremost, being your authentic self, and also doing the work that you do and having a beautiful heart. And I know that they are wanting to stalk you already on social media so that they can connect with you and follow your work. If they want to find you, where can they find you, and what is the best way for them to connect with you?
So you can find me on my website, which is attuneme.org, or on Instagram at attuneme, or I have my personal Instagram account, which I also share very openly about my journey. That's at Niamh Yvonne Cronin.
Awesome. I will add all of those links in the post as well. But for now, Niamh, thank you so much, first and foremost, for being my friend, always being there for me, always being a very solid sounding board, and somebody who can not only give me really powerful advices, but also help me find my own answers within. So I really, truly appreciate our friendship. And secondly, for being this interview, sharing your wisdom, sharing everything that you know, and living your life in a way that you do. And you are truly a gift to all of us, and especially to me. Thank you so much for being here.